Show your support for the Untold Radio Network family of shows and join in on the conversation by using super stickers and super chats on YouTube. Got a question you want answered? Ask it live via a super chat and get real-time responses from our show's knowledgeable hosts and guests. Help keep the Untold Radio Network shows running strong. We need your support. Send your super chats and stickers now.
Hi there, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to episode 57 of Down South Anomalies. This is Sex, Lies and UFOs.
It is.
JFK, 60 years on the 60th anniversary of the assassination of Kennedy. How astounding. Now, that's happening. We're actually... we're a little behind in our recording process, but that's happening on Wednesday this week.
Yeah, we recorded it a day before the assassination, but it will go to air a few days after.
Yes. So what I have to say is, of course, every episode we are broadcasting on stolen land. It is the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and we need to pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging. And returning guest, we are so honoured.
We are.
We are so privileged to have the ultimate Renaissance man, an incredible author, lecturer.
Yep.
This man has appeared in so many interviews and TV series. I think he's got more than a couple of dozen books there.
Oh, yeah.
He is an avid student of theology. He's an avid linguist, and many of them dead languages. But this person to me is like the ultimate gentleman when it comes to looking at the other side of the way we perceive this planet. His books, The Sinister Forces and Unholy Alliance, are truly inspirational. If you haven't got those, you need to wander off.
Absolutely.
He has been working recently since 2017 in tandem with the To the Stars Academy and Tom DeLong. If it wasn't for those individuals laying the groundwork out there, we wouldn't be seeing the form of information in the public arena about the subject of ufology as we are today. Please look this gentleman's astounding literature up. Check him out on all sorts of sites, and you will be profoundly affected by the great gravitas of this man's research.
Absolutely.
And the decency and incredible humanity. And the other thing is the humility that he can actually do a cast with people that are going nowhere fast. I really appreciate that, because usually he is on casts where there are hundreds of thousands of people. And if you look at our algorithm, we are just
it doesn't
spiraling towards more and more obscurity.
Whether it's a live performance or a podcast or whatever, we always bring down everybody to ours.
We reduce them
to our level.
Virtually nothing. So our absolute apologies there.
At least we're consistent.
Yes.
Yeah.
And thank you so much, Peter, for being with us today. We truly appreciate it.
No, the pleasure is mine. Thank you very much for that introduction. As far as being a Renaissance man, I think I was born during the Renaissance, which is possibly why. But you've been very kind in your introduction. Thank you very much. Very happy to be here.
It's truly sincerely felt. What I think we might do is we might go down to a moving piece to just set the tone. Set the tone. So let's go to a little bit of newsreel footage just there, the CBC announcers.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll do that first.
Here is a news bulletin from the CBC television news service. Here is a picture of President Kennedy and his wife taken just before he was shot today in Dallas, Texas. President Kennedy is reported to be fighting for his life in a Dallas hospital, but reports conflict. CBS says he is dead. Here is a picture of the president. You've seen the picture of the president just before he was shot in the limousine in Dallas, Texas. Mr. Kennedy was struck in the head. The governor of Texas, John Connally, was shot in the back. And it's reported the American Vice President, Lyndon Johnson, was also shot, but he is not in serious condition in an emergency operation. That was a bulletin from the CBC television news service.
And I love that point about reports conflict, because that would
very
have been
conflicting.
articulated very early, that actually has turned into a whole plethora
Big
of
confliction.
confliction. Now, Peter, I'd love to ask you your memory, because the majority of people in this world that were alive during that assassination, I can remember it distinctly, and I wouldn't have been older than 5 years of age.
Yeah.
And I can remember my parents' reaction.
Yeah.
Where were you on that day, and what first hit you when the news actually hit the public?
Well, I have to admit, I don't have an alibi. I was 13 years old. I was staying home from school that day. I'm not really don't really remember why. Probably an invented stomachache or something. But I was home from school that day, and I was in my room. It's a small town in Charlestown, New Hampshire, a small house, a very remote place. We were miles and miles from civilization. I had written about Charlestown briefly here and there. It's kind of a haunted house situation. And my mother came in to my room, stood in the doorway, and said, "They've shot the president." That was the terminology she used. Not the president's been shot, someone shot the president, but they've shot the president. And that's sort of that statement just has lingered with me my entire life, because who's they, right? It implies there was more than one shooter. It implies there was more than one person behind the assassination, even if there was one shooter. So the whole Pandora's box that they represents. So from that moment, of course, and I say I don't have an alibi, we had just moved to New Hampshire that year we were living in Chicago at the time. I'm from New York. It's a long story. We moved from Chicago to this small town, and everybody was very suspicious of us in that small town. 1963 in New Hampshire. This was around the time of the Betty and Barney Hill UFO abduction thing that happened in the same state in New Hampshire. Very rural place, very strange state in those days. And our license plates were Illinois, which was very unusual. When our car parked anywhere in the small town, people would just sort of stare at it, because they would never see people from Illinois in Chicago, in New Hampshire. So when I went back to school on Monday, I got these suspicious looks, and I'm thinking, what? You thought I did it? I wasn't in school. I realized I'm from out of town, and Chicago was kind of like, Al Capone territory, but come on, calm down.
Yeah.
But anyway, so it did make a very strong impression. That whole funeral that week and all the rest of it was Thanksgiving era time as well in the States. So it was this accumulation of different feelings and different ideas. Watching Walter Cronkite from CBS announcing the assassination, you could see how visibly moved he was. He really reflected the feelings of a lot of people. And I think it was probably the last time that my parents voted for a Democrat, because they were Kennedy supporters. They really did like Kennedy at the time. And after that, everything changed. My parents were sort of very right-wing types. They became, sort of what we would call MAGA these days. And everything shifted, except for me. I'm trying to figure this all out. I'm 13 years old, so it's puberty, it's high school, it's all the rest of it. And I'm trying to make sense of what happened. And then within 5 years, we lost Bobby Kennedy. And that's when it looked as if there was a snowballing effect, that people of a certain political persuasion were being rubbed out, just, mercilessly, one after another. We were using assassination as a political tool. So when that happened, the Kennedy assassination from President Kennedy, and then Bobby Kennedy, Vietnam, all of it was all in one big picture, one big package that you had to deal with in 1968. The Tet Offensive, and then the Democratic National Convention in August, which was a whole other situation with Mayor Daley in Chicago, and beating people up in the streets and all the rest of it. So we were living through a very, very tumultuous time. And the Kennedy.
You'd also had the Martin Luther assassination.
Martin Luther King, absolutely. Yeah. We had Malcolm X assassination. We have all kinds. They were just falling like flies.
Yeah.
So it was just, it looked as if the whole world was falling apart. And the Kennedy assassination, President Kennedy's assassination, was the beginning of it. Was the the ignition for an entire maelstrom of political upheaval that took place since then.
You know, I'm sort of pondering the fact of listeners that might be thinking, and people here viewing on YouTube might be thinking, well, what's the significance of this 60 years later? Why should we keep going back to this event?
Yeah, of course, people of my generation, you know, they call us boomers. You know, we can't get over this, you know, what we've been through, and we seem to have blinders on. We can't see the rest of the world. That's what we're accused of anyway. But what I think people don't realize is that Kennedy represented a way of looking at the world, a way of looking at politics, a way of looking at foreign policy, even a way of dealing with the Soviet Union, which had put missiles in Cuba just like a year or so before his assassination. His ability to calm everything down, to talk to people, and to have an optimistic point of view about where we could go. Of course, he was a little slower in some of this than his brother. Bobby was more of a firebrand when it came to racial equality, for instance, and things of that nature, and getting out of Vietnam and the peace movement. Bobby was more in tune with a younger generation that was growing up at the time. But he pushed his brother in the right directions, and he went after the mafia, and he went after a lot of this. They were not saints, you know. Jack
we know that. Yeah.
Bobby wasn't a saint, but you could go down, as I've been to South America, and you will be in towns in South America that have streets named after Jack Kennedy, and you will have pictures of Kennedy in people's houses next to a picture of Jesus or a picture of the Pope or something. So there's Kennedy. Kennedy was revered not only in the United States, he was revered around the world for many reasons. And he was looked at as the hope that maybe we would achieve some kind of international peace while Kennedy was there. Somehow the Cold War was going to dissipate as long as Kennedy was there working at it. And Vietnam was a very important part of this, because all evidence seems to point to the fact that Jack Kennedy, President Kennedy, would have taken us out of Vietnam, that he didn't like what was happening in Vietnam. He didn't trust his generals. He didn't trust the Pentagon. He sure as hell didn't trust the CIA after Bay of Pigs. So he was actually a president who was saying, okay, we're going to pull back from this. We're going to use common sense and get out of this. And of course, he was assassinated. And within a month, we escalated the war in Vietnam. Everything went sideways almost immediately, which made people like me begin to wonder as to what was really going on here. If the political situation changed that drastically after his assassination, the implication was his assassination was planned for that very reason. And that might have been too much speculation or too much magical thinking, but it sure seemed that way. It sure seemed that everything just went to hell after that. All the things that we were hoping for were taken from us just in that one moment. And now we're still paying for it. We're still paying for these military adventures all over the world that don't make any sense. Of course, we paid for Vietnam, and then we had to pay for a whole bunch of military adventures all around the globe, in Latin America and Africa and Asia, just everywhere.
It certainly set him on a path to do that, didn't it? Yeah.
It sure did, yeah.
And was it a trigger point for you as a creator, as a writer, as a thinker, as a philosopher, that drove you towards who you are today? Do you see it as a major trigger point there, that incident?
100%, absolutely. I mean, I wrote Sinister Forces motivated by this sentiment. I have chapters on, of course, on the Kennedy assassination, on the Bobby Kennedy assassination as well. It was a trigger point. It made a young person prematurely politically aware, let's put it that way, aware that there is a personal stake when it comes to politics, that it's not something that is boring stuff you read about in the newspapers. In my day, the newspapers, boring things that you would read about at that time, and, you know, this congressman and that senator and this country and that contract and that treaty and all the rest of it. You have a personal stake in it, that it's going to affect you. These things will affect you down the line, and they affect the culture very much so. I mean, we had Jackie Kennedy, who was involved with the arts, involved with, musicians and painters and writers and all of this in the White House, right? We really haven't had that since. We had a little bit of it, but usually with, one type of president, not with another type of president. So there's a definite cultural bifurcation taking place in the United States between two different points of view about how the world should be and what our role in the world should be. And distrust of the government is something that I grew up with for reasons. Kennedy being assassinated, then Bobby Kennedy being assassinated. Who was doing that? Who was behind it? Why was that happening? Why were these people specifically being taken out? I was in high school when Martin Luther King, was assassinated. And then I was still in high school when Bobby was assassinated 3 months later. It's just what was going on, right? And that was only a few months after the Tet Offensive. So you become very aware that there's connective tissue. And once you look at the connective tissue and you start doing what I was doing, which was collecting newspaper clippings and magazine clippings and books and trying to collect documents and trying to make sense of it all, you have this naive belief that you will eventually make sense of it all, that you will eventually see everything and the problem will be solved. The murder mystery will be solved. It'll be an episode on, the ID network in the United States where they have an hour of, this murder took place and here's the evidence and now we finally killed it. Done and dusted, right? I'm 73 years old and I'm still waiting for it to be done and dusted, and they're declassifying more documents in the Kennedy assassination. If it really was that old and that irrelevant, why are there thousands of documents that still have not been declassified? Why is it still an issue? It should not be an issue anymore. You can't tell me, you can't tell me that it's something to do with the intelligence agencies and how they operate that we have to keep secret. If they're still doing the stuff today they did 60 years ago, we're in deep trouble, right?
Sure.
So there has to be something more to it than that, right? There has to be something more than the usual explanations they give us. So that means it's still relevant. That means what happened is still relevant today, that there is still a mystery. It hasn't been solved yet.
I mean, that's that decade, and even though Camelot in many ways is a veneer painted on it, I don't think we've seen another point in time where out of one country came an incredible embracing of culture, an eloquence, a sheer poetry in the language of political discussion that we'd never seen before. I mean, just the literacy of Malcolm X, Kennedy himself, his humor, his ability mentally to remember his astounding quotes and use them in the most profound sense, Robert Kennedy again, and Martin Luther King. There was this incredible uplift that finally we're, and as you were saying about South America embracing the Kennedy legacy, so did Europe. And Europe profoundly opened their arms to this intelligent, poetic way of approaching the world. And we all had this sense of great hope that there could be a moment, as delusional as it appears now, where this planet may never have war, where we might be able to all of a sudden change the bulk of the taxpayers' economy to assist the poor and the needy and the disabled and go further than we ever could before. And I think that Kennedy assassination was the beginning of that fracture that very rapidly became a massive crack.
I think it was a realization
of consensus reality.
Okay, this is never going to happen.
Very disturbing. And of course, I think all of us, we're on some sort of quest to find meaning in existence beyond the harm and the sadistic nature that human beings can impose on each other. And I think this was the severing of that, where it sort of drove us all to start investigating and looking for more information as to how something like this could even occur. And the astounding thing to me about the Kennedy assassination is at 5 years of age, I can still remember my father being furious and stomping the floor. And obviously your parents, by using the plural, were well aware that this is a conspiracy. It seemed to be incredibly transparent.
Right.
And especially to those people in Dallas who were well aware of the machinations that were hiding in the background there at that time.
There were newspaper ads about Kennedy being a traitor to the
That's
country.
right.
I mean,
For treason.
for treason. So,
On billboards.
come on.
Yep.
Those people didn't like him. The people who had the money to actually pay for those billboards, that means they had power, did not like that guy. So, it was no shock that he was actually shot in the head there in front of everybody. So
I guess the point I'm getting to, the question I'm getting to is, as a researcher that's dallianced the world of parapolitics, then did you start to look at the data? I know that the lecturer and comedian Dick Gregory did an astounding thing on that day, and that was he actually started recording different radio stations and TV stations with separate tape recorders, and within a very short amount of time was aware of major contradictions in the narrative and where the shooters were coming from. So did you start to look at the research and start to piece those contradictions together quite early?
I mean, I've had some friends of mine who are well known in this area. For instance, Dick Russell, who's I've met him a number of times. He's a fascinating guy. He wrote The Man Who Knew Too Much, and it's this very thick book about one aspect of the Kennedy assassination. He took a deep dive into it. Another is the late Hank Albarelli. Hank Albarelli he passed away a little while ago, about a year or so ago, but his book has been published since then posthumously on the Kennedy assassination, and it's still an ongoing thing. I mean, these people have looked at everything. I mean, they pull every document out, which is the only way you can handle this, is to really take a look at every single document, look at the headers, look at the dates, look at the people's names on the list, look who signs it, look what they're talking about, and create these vast archives and of putting together all of the available data. And you just keep waiting for that extra document that's going to come in. There's one more document you need, maybe you'll tie it all up together. And there's massive amounts. I'm in a different room where I have the Kennedy material, but I have shelves of it. I mean, shelves of books on the Kennedy assassination, not to count boxes of files, because that was my first introduction into this entire subject, was the Kennedy assassination. And it was triggered again when Watergate happened. And when Watergate happened, and I saw some of the same names and the same people involved in Nixon's White House and in all the dirty tricks that had, tangential relationships to the assassinations, my mind, just woke up, and I said, oh my goodness, there's something much bigger here. And I started collating all of that information as well. E. Howard Hunt, is a perfect example. I mean, Howard Hunt was the action officer in charge of the Bay of Pigs invasion, right? He was the guy that was supposed to be running that for CIA. And then he's involved in Watergate. I mean, he hated Kennedy because of the Bay of Pigs. And then he's, working for the Nixon White House to try to destroy the Democrats on the other side. So all of this is going on. And then by chance, I'm working in a very tiny little import-export firm in Queens, New York. And the guy at the table next to me, at the desk next to me, was E. Howard Hunt's partner at, Mullen Corporation in Washington, the front that they had for the CIA, doing stuff all over the world. And what we don't realize is that Hunt was there, writing copy or ad copy or something ostensibly. But of course, he was one of the plumbers working for the Nixon White House. And this other guy that I worked with spoke fluent Chinese, Mandarin, fluent Portuguese, had been stationed in Brazil, had been stationed in Singapore, and was running operations against China, right? And these were all guys working for the same little firm in DC that was a front. And so you begin to say, my God, I mean, and of course I had worked for that church in 1968 that numbered David Ferry and Jack Martin. So suddenly, although I'm studying on my own the assassinations, now I'm sort of wandering in their circles. I mean, how does that work, right? And it doesn't make sense logically. And that's where you get into the realm of parapolitics. There's something else that's happening here. There's a completely different reality where, you can be studying the assassination, then find you're rubbing shoulders with people who would know a lot more about it than you, because they were named in the Warren Commission documents, or they were named in Jim Garrison's investigations. So that's what makes it suddenly very strange. I couldn't be a Hank Albarelli. I couldn't be a Dick Russell, because these guys were trying to really solve the case. I'm in a different world now. I'm someplace else. I also want to solve the case, but the information I'm getting is not logical. I mean, it's not the purely documented stuff you could go to court with, in a court of law and say this is the person who's guilty. Remember that scene in JFK? You had David Ferry's character, Joe Pesci.
Joe Pesci. Mm.
Yeah. And they're asking him. He has the really weird red wig on and everything else. And Kevin Costner, as Jim Garrison, asks him, "Well, who killed Kennedy?" And Ferry goes absolutely nuts, right? Who killed Kennedy? Who killed Kennedy? It's a mystery wrapped in a riddle inside an enigma. No one knows who killed. The shooters don't even know. And that line, the shooters don't even know.
Yeah.
That's the tagline for all of this. The shooters didn't know.
Yeah.
And this is something that I think says more about the assassination, about the culture that we're living in, the reality we're living in, than all the books of the Warren Report. I mean, all the volumes just don't get there. The truth is in there somewhere, but we don't know how to find it yet because we're using the wrong tools, probably.
Yeah.
Do you perceive that we have David Throssell on recently, who's an amazing Australian musician, but he's an incredible researcher as well. And he's written numerous articles. And he actually, during the course of searching for old lost music, especially the back catalogue of artists, country and Western artists, very, inciting artists, Johnny Paycheck.
Yeah.
He finds that the owners of his back catalogue is Aubrey Mayhew, who became the largest collector of JFK ephemera. He brought the school book depository building. He brought the PT boat that was shot on, that was Kennedy.
Yeah.
And of course, by the purchasing, in the end, he had well over 300,000 items in his personal collection. He wanted to set up a museum. Now, David has always been drawn, like we all have, to Kennedy because of that timeline and because of an amazing remark by his father at the time. And he had no idea that there was any connection there. But this odd sort of synchronicity starts to occur when you investigate this material, and whether you like it or not, it draws you deeper into that rabbit hole.
It has a kind of gravitational field, and it's like you're being swallowed up by a black hole. You can never really get out, and you never really can get in either. You're constantly on this event horizon, and you can't go in one direction or the other. But it's inexorable. You're moving.
You're just
but
there. You're there.
You're there.
Yeah. Would you? He actually made a statement. He went down to the Top 10 record store in 2016. They're on tour in the States. He has a band called Snog. They're a highly politically charged band, so much so that he found out halfway into that tour, and half his band members turned to him and said, "You have turned us into Lee Harvey Oswald." That they were actually being toured. The tour was being funded covertly by DARPA. DARPA were keeping an eye. Yes, absolutely. They were keeping an eye on their crowds and what they were doing, and if they actually had some huge motivational force in their fan base, of which they didn't, but they were totally shocked. So he goes along, he's desperate, his wife's wanting to look at fashion in the thrift store, and he's going, "I've got to get to Top 10 Records in Oak Cliff." This is where J.D. Tippett, who was shot directly after the assassination, the other police officer had run in and grabbed the phone. He went in there, and the original workers were there. The owner was
guy
there.
who was running it.
They all spoke to him about seeing Lee Harvey Oswald.
He sold him. The guy that owned the store that David was talking to had sold Lee Harvey Oswald the ticket to the
Dick Clark.
Was it Dick Clark? Yeah, the bandstand show that was, that morning.
That evening that show was going to be on, and I ask you, what assassin would go, "Okay, well, I'll kill Kennedy at midday, and then I'll get prepared for the Dick Clark musical show in the evening." And he was shocked that no one had ever gone in and interviewed these people. They had the original worker there that had seen Tippett run in and use the phone. And as a matter of fact, as a historian of music, He said, "Do you have any original music from the time?" They went into the back of the shop and pulled out 2 huge boxes of singles and sold him original copies from the 60s for their original price of 25 cents each. I said, "You should have taken the entire back catalogue."
Right.
But he was just astounded. And I said, obviously, the Warren Commission, no one had gone there and interviewed these guys, that story had been out there, which I found absolutely astounding.
Of course, the Warren Commission's not going to go and interview these people, because these people are not going to give them the right answers that they want. You know, they're going to tell them their version of the truth, which is not the version that they're pushing.
Yeah, and obviously, I mean, those 2 gentlemen, just in that short time he had in that store, all of a sudden led into incredible parapolitical research, and that was that Ruby and Oswald knew each other. They communicated with each other.
Because they used to go in there all the time.
And those stores were like your council hall. They were a community meeting place. They're open early in the morning, and people before work could go in and listen to music, have a cup of coffee, chat,
buy tickets,
and that sort of stuff occurred. So just astounding in 2016 that can still occur.
Incredible. It's unbelievable. I can't picture Lee Harvey Oswald going to a Dick Clark concert, but okay.
Yeah, well, that's
there you go.
He had the ticket.
So
maybe he was covertly meeting someone there. I don't know.
Yeah.
So he had a feeling, David, in the end, that they have a certain arrogance in terms of what they're getting away with. And they love to actually dangle that carrot in front of the public like a form of social engineering. And that astounded me. What's your thought about that? That we might be put into some sort of, I mean, really, when you get down to it, let's think about this. I mean, Ruby that actually shot the alleged assassin, Lee Harvey Oswald, that was the first time anyone had ever witnessed an execution live on television, and it was the largest viewed moment in television history at that time. So it could be an astounding piece of psychological warfare.
Well, we're getting into now. You're starting to get into my territory now. You know, so this is the thing that has gotten me off on a tangent, and I didn't realize the extent of it until recently, as it turns out. I was, for various reasons, I was rewatching, believe it or not, Twin Peaks.
We love it.
I watched the first 2 seasons of the show, and then I just binged and went and saw Fire Walk with Me. Mm-hmm. And then I said, okay, now I'm going to watch the 25th anniversary, the 25 years later, The Return. And then suddenly it hit me. By episode 12, it hit me what was going on, or what I was doing, and maybe what Lynch was doing, and maybe what we're all doing. I realized that you could read Sinister Forces as a way to understand what's going on in Twin Peaks. Or you could watch Twin Peaks to understand what's going on in Sinister Forces. And the reason I say this is that, of course, for all the obvious reasons that I never really thought about. But that episode 12 starts off with the Miguel Ferrer character, David Lynch as Gordon Cole, and an FBI agent, a lady played by Krista Bell. They're sitting in a room, and the first words out of Miguel Ferrer's mouth is, we have to read you into this, that in 1970, the Air Force canceled Project Blue Book. Wow. But then a few years later, the FBI and the Air Force and some other people got together and created this ad hoc committee in order to study those things that the Blue Book operation could not solve, those famous cases that have no explanation. And we call that the Blue Rose. And as he's saying all of this, it goes through my mind, well, my God, that's it, right? I mean, I'm writing about the Kennedy assassination and Sinister Forces, and I wind up talking about UFOs, right? I'm talking about UFOs and the Kennedy assassination, and I morph into serial killers, right? To the Manson killings and Son of Sam and all of it, right? All the murders of innocent people by these serial killers. and there's the government involvement, and there's the Indian burial mounds, which is basically Twin Peaks with the two mountains and all the rest of it. And I'm thinking, oh my God, I was doing Twin Peaks all this time. Either that or David Lynch was doing Sinister Forces. But if we suddenly look at the assassination, because we cannot solve it, no matter what we do, we cannot come up with a solution that makes everybody happy. The core idea of Twin Peaks is that there's a place called the Black Lodge. And the Black Lodge has doubles of everybody, of certain specific individuals on Earth. Cooper goes into the Black Lodge and comes out. There's an evil Cooper and there's a good Cooper. And the guy who killed Laura Palmer is her father, right? Who there's an evil Leland Palmer and there's a good Leland Palmer, and on and on and on. And what did we have during the Kennedy assassination? We had Oswald doubles everywhere. There were two Oswalds here, two Oswalds over there. There was an Oswald at a firing academy, at a shooting range, when he was supposed to be in Mexico. There was another Oswald in Mexico who obviously wasn't Oswald. And they have a photograph of this big heavyset guy.
Yeah.
And they say, well, that's Lee Harvey Oswald. Well, of course it's not. If you use the Black Lodge as an explanation for the Kennedy assassination, it kind of makes sense. Because it's pointing to the parapolitical aspect of history. It's pointing to there is another force. And I wrote about that in Sinister Forces, like 3 volumes, trying to show people there is something else going on. And it's not a deep state cabal, and it's not a bunch of guys smoking cigarettes or cigars in a back room plotting these things. Of course, they're there, and they do plot these things. But why are they so successful? And why do they pull it off so well, so easily in front of you every single time? Because it's misdirection. You're looking at something, but you're not looking at it. You're not seeing what you're looking at. And that was the whole point of all the coincidences and synchronicities in Twin Peaks. These things are going on constantly, and we kind of don't see them. And then something happens, and it brings our attention back. And I think that that's one way I've developed recently of trying to explain to myself what happened in Dallas in November '63. It was the Black Lodge. It was, the evil Oswald. It was something like that, right? It was. It's a metaphor, but it's a way of explaining, of getting to a deeper level. In Sinister Forces, Jacques Vallée, I quoted him at one point. He wrote what he wrote at the moment he heard about the assassination in his diary. And he says, I discover with surprise to what extent I had judged and admired my new country through Kennedy's actions. This brutal death reminds me of the existence of a volcano of violent realities underneath the orderly unfolding of our best plans. The real beyond is not that which follows death, but that which stretches underneath life itself. In this sense, the saucers, the UFOs, are a potential source of cultural and strategic upheaval, just like yesterday's killing in Dallas. Just as in Dallas, we are dreadfully unprepared. And that's Jacques Vallée putting his finger on it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's there, right?
Yeah.
Which is not to exonerate the assassins, right? It's not to exonerate them. Leland Palmer still has to go to jail. I mean, this still has to happen. But it's a way of helping to explain the situation, explain what's going on a deeper level, let's say.
And still going on today.
Yeah.
You know what really affected me then? You sent a chill through my spine. We have got a green screen up here and we look neat and ordered. But we live in a warehouse. We've lived there for 22 years. That is chaos. We have books to the ceiling, shelves in front of shelves. And yesterday, moving objects around, trying to prepare for this interview and find more of your literature and go through it, I actually came across a gift I brought for you over a year ago. It was a sealed box set of Twin Peaks.
Oh, right. Yes. Yes.
Because we needed to rewatch it.
Yes.
Because I've always felt that Lynch was certainly onto something much deeper. And for me, metaphorically, allegorically, Blue Velvet states that within its first 5 minutes.
Yeah.
As the camera pans deep into the grass to show the microcosm of the macrocosm.
Yeah.
And that confliction, the notion of the yang and the yin, the light and the dark running parallel together. I would love to know if you've ever had any contact with Lynch and if Lynch is a fan of Sinister Forces, because there really is an astounding parallel when I now think about it.
It is now. I've never spoken to Lynch or had any direct contact with him. I don't know if I know people who know Lynch. I know a number of directors here and there, but I've never. Lynch has always been this sort of idol, this sort of initiate kind of, an initiated person who's making movies. And so I treat him kind of with sort of a distance and reverence, but you're exactly right. I mean, everything, Lost Highway, Mulholland Drive, it's all about, doubles and synchronicities and two realities working against each other, with each other, interpenetrating each other. So
do you think he's been let in? Do you think he's been let in?
Well, I mean, he's a very well-known, famous proponent of transcendental meditation, right? So he's involved in the mystical life, and it informs a lot of his work. I think it's part of what he's doing. Whether he's been let in or not, don't know.
In that sense, he has been let in, and we've all got a glimpse, to a certain extent, of that other ethereal reality. We've had a few odd moments, and my wife, who's extremely rational, being a tenacious Greek lass that migrated here and gave birth on a home bed in a traditional family and told no one.
My God.
When she was 16 years ago.
Can you not go there?
So she deals with things. I think it's a marvelous storage of courage and audacity.
Insanity.
We've had some moments which are rather odd, and we're very close as a couple. And there are moments where you've actually seen a doppelganger of me when we've been working.
Yeah. And I know this guy, seriously. I mean, I knew this guy before I even met him. I was waiting for him. You know what I mean?
Just quickly tell Peter that story about you coming to the nursing home.
No. Let's not go there. It's too long, too
but
involved.
It is so intuitively frightening.
It's like I knew I was going to meet him that day, and I did. But anyway, I saw him one time in the street, and I can spot, because Jamie's quite tall, and I can spot him in a crowd quite far away, and I know how he walks and, all of that stuff, being together for 33 years now, of course. And I swore to God that was him, and it wasn't. And it was.
And we were working that evening.
I was working, and I was waiting for you, and I was looking for you, and I saw you. And then when the guy walked up closer to me, it wasn't him. And I was absolutely, freaked out, going, what the hell is going on here? I have never mistaken my husband for someone else ever, So yeah, that was a really bizarre, really jarred me kind of moment.
We've been working extensively with a clinical psychologist who, has had a very respected practice here in Australia, but has had a lot of clients with signs of incredible anomalous experience and trauma from that he hasn't spoken on the record. Now, in the past 6 months, he has had 3 major doppelganger experiences in his local area that have never occurred before. So I'm sorry, I'm just getting a long path to rephrase that question to you. Have you ever had that experience in your life, or do you know of people that have?
Well, I had it once. As you're talking about it, it reminded me. In 1980, I had moved from Brooklyn Heights, where I lived at the time, to Queens, to an area of Queens called Briarwood. And I'm painting this apartment that I just moved into. And as I'm painting the apartment, I look out the windows. I'm on the 2nd floor, and it looks down onto the sidewalk. And I look down, and I see myself walking towards me down the sidewalk, dressed the way I would normally dress in those days. I used to wear a beret constantly for practical reasons, because of the subway and the hair and all the rest of it. So I would wear this beret, and here I am walking down the street, dressed as I'm dressed, with the beret. I'm staring at myself walking down the street, and I'm not walking down the street alone. I'm walking with a friend of mine also who lived in Brooklyn. And I'm thinking, whoa, this is weird. So I run down the stairs to talk to myself, or to whoever this is, to get a better look, and that person is not there. I mean, they're just not there. But they were walking down the street. They were I was obviously myself. I'm looking at myself walking down the street. So maybe that was the good Levenda. I don't know.
I doubt it. It was probably just the other Levenda. And you've actually, that doppelganger you saw got into a car. They didn't come up to you.
Well,
they
and
got
then I
into a
walked,
car.
and they when they drove past, I could see that it wasn't you. That's what I mean when they come closer.
Amazing. All right. Look, we're going to go to a little bit of we need to play that incredible 38 seconds. What did I do with that still just then? Let me get rid of that.
Hang on.
I'm always this thing.
Hang on.
A little bit of disturbance, but I wanted to go to that still. There it is. What we're going to look at is we're going to look at that 32, is it 38 seconds of the Super 8, most amazing Super 8 footage in the world of the assassination. But I'm just going to show how incredibly transparent this was early in the piece. Granted, the public really didn't see the Zapruder film to the 70s through Geraldo Rivera and bootleg copies that were taken by Mike Lane during the Jim Garrison
court
Guy Bannister Clay Shaw trial, which is So let's have a look at a still taken as the presidential limousine comes onto Elm Street. Now, as we can see here, the crowd at the side is all moving. They've been waiting, and there's so few people because that route was changed.
It was changed at the last minute. Yeah.
So if you go down to the moving image, and we'll get through this rather quickly because I just want to get back to Peter, but I want you to keep that still on there, Aspa.
Oh, sorry.
The idea is to keep that still.
Keep the still. Okay. Got the still. Okay.
So we're looking at the still photography versus the Super 8 footage.
Okay.
So let's maybe just go to this scene first, this little bit of newsroom footage to show just how out of control the crowd.
10 minutes before noon. The motorcade begins the 11-mile ride to the Dallas Trade Mart, where the president is to deliver a major address. Governor and Mrs. Connolly ride in the presidential limousine. In a downtown building, a gunman waits at a sixth-floor window, a high-powered rifle by his side. A radio newsman describes the motorcade as it moves toward the Dallas Trade Mart.
So what people can see there is the large numbers of people on the side and no police, and how quickly it would be for someone to run out and do something in that car.
I was on Simmons Freeway earlier, and even the freeway was jam-packed with spectators waiting their chance to see the president as he made his way toward the Trade Mart.
Okay. So let's now go to the Zapruder film. Now, what I want the public to do here, and I'm sorry for those people listening on audio, you need to go to our YouTube channel to look at this. Let's look at a restored version of the Zapruder film, which I suspect anything that has been digitally restored, we're still going to see not the original elements of this film whatsoever.
Okay.
But we will, if you notice the people on the left, they're completely different to this group of people in the still photograph. We're also seeing 6 seconds or so removed from the original film, which I suspect is when the car was brought to a halt. So see how they're standing still on the left-hand side? They are not moving whatsoever. I mean, all of a sudden, Kennedy's going to appear. No one's got their hands up.
No one's
they're
waving.
Not waving. They're just standing there. So in a sense, optically, it looks like this was dropped in. Now, what we can do here is avoid that headshot. Let's go down to the next bit of footage. You're not avoiding it at all. And again, we'll see a more panoramic version here with a frame stacking. But you'll see again that audience is lifeless. They're just, obviously, this was shot way before with the people on the left-hand side.
Yeah.
And this car has been dropped into
So they've been waiting for the president to drive down, and the president drives past them and nobody waves or does anything. It just doesn't make any sense.
And one last thing I'm going to pop up here is that's going to take us into the 21st century where we are now is what's happening with AI in this film and what people...
All right, so Photoshop, new generative AI fill. I got it selected here. And it's,
so this is what's happening with AI in terms of the Zapruder film, which puts researchers like this into a whole other world of conflict now, because anything can be recreated.
But why would you even look at that stuff now?
Canvas expanded.
People will be using it.
To do what?
To create more subterfuge.
I don't think we need any more subterfuge. There's enough.
It's never going to stop.
It'd be the extended tail. Like another car right there. This is crazy. Well, again, I'm blown away by Photoshop.
So look at the freeway sign out. All right, let's pop Peter and ourselves back in there. Let's get rid of that.
We're in there. Okay. Can I just show something too? I want to show, because this has always fascinated me.
We'll just wait till we get Peter back. I want to talk about this.
So Peter's there.
Yeah, we need to get rid of that still.
Okay.
Yeah,
all right.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry
about all that. But it's showing just how obviously contrived even the Zapruder film was by the time it got into the hands of the public. Now, I was looking at a site that just popped up recently, a new digitized version, and I would swear to God, and we're film historians, we live in a building of 35 mil, 70 mil, 16 mil, 9.5 crazy formats. I'm looking at this thing, JFK tapes. It won't let me bring it down, but look at it on YouTube. It looks like 16
it does.
millimeter
It's not,
footage.
it's not 8 millimeter. No way is that 8 millimeter.
So I suspect, and there were rumors, and I don't know if your research has read you there, I suspect that we are looking at a heavily altered Zapruder film. There may even be an alternative Zapruder film.
Well, from what I understand, there were at least 2 versions of that film, and they did not match. I mean, one film was released that showed a slightly different sequence of events than the other film that was released. Now we're talking 20 years ago. So this is long before we had the capabilities we have today, right? But it was already wrong. There was already big controversy. Did they switch frames? Did they take frames from the front and put them in the back and vice versa? So we know that that film was hiding at, was it Time Life, right?
That's
I
right.
think they're the ones who owned it. And the guy who ran Time Life at the time, you have to remember, was the guy who was in charge of psychological warfare for Dwight Eisenhower during World War II. That was his thing, was psychological warfare operations. So now he's running Time Life, and he's the guy we gave the Zapruder film to for safekeeping, right?
Yeah.
No, it's the chain of custody here is totally broken. So whatever they had, whatever Garrison had, he had the best that he had at the time, and he made a case for the shot coming from the front. But then different versions of that film started to surface, and now what you're showing me is quite compelling. An entire crowd just sitting there silent, waiting for the car to go by, which doesn't make sense, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, we must remember it was the time of breakthroughs in commercial cinema. I mean, that was around the time Mary Poppins came out, which is, had a new level of matte painting.
Yeah, and
superimposition. So the wonders of altering cinema were already there in the hands of the commercial industry, which we would say is a faint reminder of the covert industry as well.
Yeah.
Now, you've got a bit of a bone to pick here this has always frustrated you greatly.
Well, it's like, if you really look at this, it's like, this is the...
And this is the cover of Life magazine.
What's happened here? Is he broke? Did he get broken in half and they reset his backbone, on a slant? I mean, look at the... the line running through him. If you put a ruler through the middle of him, it's like his legs are out to the side. He's doing like a side kick. This is it here. This is the photo of Oswald armed for murder. Saying that he is the murderer. Right. And look, I don't know how he's standing up, but if you have a look at his fingers on the newspaper.
You can, if you blow it out and
if you blow it up, like go in close, and I've seen a close up, he's got no fingernails because his fingers have been cropped. Like his fingernails are missing. All his fingers are the same size. It just makes is that one as well there? Yeah. So
that one gives you the line.
Yeah. So this one gives you the lines of like rulers of how straight. See, if you put a ruler straight through, it's like. That is a cut and paste picture of Oswald, and it was on the front cover of Life magazine. That's like in plain sight to show you that somebody's doctored that picture, right? It's totally doctored. There's no two ways about it, and that was in plain sight, and we couldn't see it. We just could not, for the life of us, see it.
And where did that photograph come from?
Well,
that's
it didn't
fascinating.
come from someone's, kitchen with some glue and
No, but I mean, the
came out and was given to the Time Life people. I'm telling you now.
it was Ruth
know?
Paine. It was
Yes,
Ruth
Oh
Paine.
yeah, absolutely.
And Ruth Paine is
Yeah, I
this
know.
thing I can't get past. Ruth Paine.
None of us can.
I mean, Ruth is like a key to this thing, and I don't know. God love her. She's still around. Like I said, I ran into her with Dick Russell one day.
Wow.
Wow.
We were, I
Some
think I
people
mentioned
you
the
can't
story.
kill with an axe.
We were going to a very sort of high security meeting in Miami of Cubans, but not the anti-Castro Cuban type, not necessarily pro-Castro, but just like anti-Castro Cubans. So these were
Right.
Cubans that were trying to arrange, a shipping to Cuba, trying to arrange travel to Cuba, a Cuban radio station that was broadcasting from Havana, picking up the broadcast from Havana, and all that. So they were getting bomb threats. They were getting killed. Their places were being bombed by the anti-Castro Cubans, right? Miami is a kind of a battleground where that's concerned. So there was going to be a meeting about the anti-Castro Cubans and terrorism, basically. They blew up an airliner, if you recall, some years ago. So all of this was going on. So there was a very high degree of security. I had to be cleared before I could attend this meeting. I had to be pre-approved, pre-cleared. When I got there, I went through one bunch of cops who looked at my ID and made sure I was supposed to be there. And then a bunch of sort of rent-a-cop types who were, also doing the same thing in a hotel near the airport in Miami. So it was extremely tight security. I got there early because I didn't know if I was going to find parking, blah, blah, blah. I get into the place. I'm sitting there. I'm one of the few people in there. And there's a woman who comes in and sits at a chair close to me on the other side of the aisle. And she asked me, is it open seating? Can she sit there? I said, I think so, And as she turned to me, I saw her name tag. It said Ruth Paine. And I'm thinking, no, can't be Ruth. And then Dick shows up, Dick Russell, who wrote The Man Who Knew Too Much, a great Kennedy assassination researcher. And he comes in, and I'm saying, Dick, it's Ruth Paine sitting over here. And he says, Ruth Paine? You interviewed her, right? And he goes over and says, my God, it is. It's Ruth Paine. And he goes and he has a chat with her. Like, what are you doing here, right? What does Ruth answer? I was just in the neighborhood and I dropped in.
Again and again.
Really? So you went through all that security and checking. She was just in the area and just dropped in.
Yeah, sure. Exactly. Right. How believable is that, right?
It's not. It's just, that's just an out and out lie.
And why would she be there at a meeting of these people that presumably, I don't know what her politics would have been, but if she was really an anti-Kennedy person, as might have been because she had Oswald in the house and then she gave him up. I mean, I don't know what her political background would have been, Quaker or not. But would she have been at a meeting of Cubans who were complaining about anti-Castro Cubans and terrorism? Why would she even be there? What
She's an operative.
reason would she have?
She's an operative. She always was, and she'll be one till the day she dies.
And I think she's again using the motif of Allah traveling bishop / Quaker.
Yeah.
So sort of, I mean, Ruth Paine
just passing, thought I'd drop in.
How does someone go, oh, look, I really want to learn a bit more Russian, and I'm going to look after, and what I'll do is I'll separate from my husband, who happens to be the CEO for Bell Helicopters, who are in a little bit of strife prior to the entry into the Vietnam War, became a multi-million-dollar company after they got in there. It just, I mean, just the gullibility of the public, and which makes me feel like they're dangling it in front of us.
It's not the gullibility of the public. It's this: we don't know who these people really are. What they present, how they present, but who they really are two totally different things. It's like,
it's not even gullibility. I mean,
we don't know.
When you're attending a magic show, right? And there's a magician on the stage making an elephant disappear. It's not that you're gullible. No. You just don't know how the trick is done.
That's right.
And that's our problem. We don't know how these tricks are done.
Yeah.
We're trying to watch his hands and,
We're looking in the wrong area.
Looking in the misconnection.
Yeah.
Let's have a little moment where we look at that televised, and I'm sorry about this again, remove the children from the room, but this is slowed down. And this will show you that who Jess Curry, the police chief in Dallas at that time, was answerable to Will Fritz before the FBI and the Secret Service stepped in. This is the transportation and removal of Oswald from police headquarters when Ruby just happened to walk in. Now, if you're aware, have a look at Jess Curry and his left hand.
Yeah.
Because it seems to be signaling Jack Ruby to move in for the kill.
In the basement of the courthouse, policemen, reporters, and cameramen were waiting for Oswald to come down an elevator there to the right to be transferred to another jail. A man named Ruby was waiting too. The scene began with the familiar routine of news coverage of public events. The officers come down. There goes Ruby.
Yes, he's not deterred at all. He's just
toward Oswald. He's firing.
So there'd be
Oswald
a
slumped
fire,
to the floor.
and this guy hasn't even looked round yet.
No, not yet.
Yeah.
And as he does, the police officers beside him leap upon Ruby, as we now know him to be, after the confusion had sorted itself out, throw him to the ground.
Yeah.
Then they take him.
You know what I'd say there, Peter, is the confusion was never going to sort itself out from that point onwards. But it is so obvious that Will Fritz is ushering Ruby in there for the kill.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree with you.
And one other last thing, let's just mark another person, of which there are thousands. This is the district.
He's been charged with both killing Officer Tippin and John F. Kennedy.
How long ago was he charged with the president's killing?
11/26. He was. 11/26. He was charged on the latter charge.
We've got a good case.
I figure we have sufficient evidence to convict him.
Did you know Ruby before this? No, sir. Saw him in this very same room Friday night when we had the defendant up here. If some of you will recall, he asked a question from out here in the audience, or answered a question. He's standing right back here, and I didn't know who he was. I thought he was a member of the press, and he told me as we walked out of here that he was a nightclub operator here.
You look to me like your good friend. I don't know what it is.
Well, other than the Dallas police officers, what officials did frequent Ruby's establishment?
Oh, such as your district attorney, which would be Mr. Wade.
And 19 of Wade's convictions had been overturned on DNA evidence later on. Now, those are convictions. In other words, this guy presented a case to the jury or a judge, depending on who heard the case, that was strong enough and had evidence strong enough to convict 19 people who were innocent, who never committed the crime, and whose convictions later on, like I said, was he even sent convinced a jury to send an innocent man to the electric chair in 1954. Henry Wade was the son of a bitch, and but this was the way they did business then. This is the way they handled things back then, and so I'm not surprised.
I wonder if they're still doing business that way. I get a slight feeling that they may be. And, you know, there we've just got two of the players. We've got Will Fritz and we've got the District Attorney Henry Wade, who features predominantly over that short period of time. It was amazing the press that they let into police headquarters. Just that would not happen today. It was a frenzy. And, you know, how can you find so much darkness? I mean, hearts of darkness in humanity with all those players in there. They all had something to gain.
Or something to hide.
And how did Ruby get in? I mean, there was no reason for Ruby to be in that room. No, the president had just been assassinated, right? Oswald is about to be assassinated. And Ruby just sort of waltzes in and pretends to be a member of the press, and he's asking questions. He's establishing his position there. He knows he's on videotape. He wants to be seen for some reason. They must have let him in deliberately. Why would you let in Ruby of all people? But they let him in.
Yeah.
He asks his question, and then and then the next day he turns around and shoots Oswald. It doesn't. None of this makes sense. If you were to write it in a book, nobody would believe it. They would say this is fantasy. It doesn't make sense, right?
Yeah.
And here we are. Here we are today, and one of the most high-profile convictions, waning sentencing, Jeffrey Epstein, all of a sudden passes away in a cell that just happens to have the second inmate removed shortly beforehand, that the cameras are not working that evening, and that the people patrolling his cell on suicide watch fell asleep.
Right.
And we,
there's
the
a
public,
perfect storm.
and we, the public, are supposed to digest that and just take that as, well, it was just a perfect storm.
Well, it's
of
just
coincidental moments that seem to me to hark very much back to what we're seeing here in 63. And for us in Australia, it harks to the Whitlam dismissal. There's a very similar motif that occurred when we lost Gough Whitlam, who was questioning bases like Pine Gap. And what was going on in our own soil, which we found out years later was an electronic intercept station that was a first strike target if there was a nuclear offensive occur, and we rented it, and it was private land to begin with, to the United States for 1 peppercorn a year. They actually used to come out with a glass jar and a peppercorn in it and hand it over.
Just to rub a bit of salt into the wound. Anyway.
Really.
So there's just a few moments that are perturbing, of which there are many thousands. But one thing I'm very curious about, Peter, is the connection to Kennedy and his interest in the subject of an alien presence. And it had been brought up many times, and there's documentation we now know through FOIA releases that showed that he actually wanted to look into the files around UFO sightings very close to that assassination. So can you tell us anything that you found in your research that links those two topics together?
Well, we know in the very first place, it was Kennedy who said, we will go to the moon, right? He was going to beat the Soviets to the moon if come hell or high water. As a young boy, I remember all the talk about the Sputnik at the time, which was freaking everybody out because it was flying over the United States. I mean, it was just going in circles, and we had nothing. There's no way for us to deal with it, and so it caused a certain amount of Cold War anxiety, along with all the the idea about the bomb and everything else. And now we have Sputniks to worry about. So for Kennedy to say, we're going to go to the moon, we're going to do it in 10 years, that's it. He put he put it down. He just put the hammer down and says, we're going to do this. The problem is this was he's made that speech, I think, in 61, if I'm not mistaken. We had 1947 with all the mishigas that went on with the UFO stuff in 47. Then in 1952, we had the famous overflights of the flying saucers flying over Washington, D.C. on 2 separate weekends, which to me was just fascinating because they would only fly on the weekends. I didn't get that. Did aliens work during the week? And they were they're right in on Saturday and Sunday. I didn't understand the weekend thing at all. But anyway, there they were on the weekends. So we had that to deal with. And then, we had the 9. And we had Andrea Puharich and his seances, which then ties back to Ruth Paine and all of the assassination. I mean, all of these connections are going on like crazy between UFOs, but the government, of course, is trying to keep it down. 1952 is when Blue Book started because of the overflights. So for 20 years, they're doing top secret research in UFOs. And here's Kennedy sort of stepping all over the place, saying, let's send rockets to the moon. Let's put men in space. Let's do all these things. Let's manned operations. We're going to go all these places. And there's somebody somewhere, somehow, at the Pentagon or somewhere in government, the equivalent in those days of what ATIP was now, or the Pentagon UFO office, investigations office, some equivalent of that. And they're saying, oh no, we can't have this, right? We can't release what we know about UFOs. This is a thorny problem. And I'll tell you what I've been able to pick up through dealing since about 2015 with Tom. meeting John Podesta, meeting people like this, they're telling us, listen, the president has access to anything he wants. He can tell anybody to give him anything. Nobody can say no to the president. The problem is you got to know what to ask and who to ask it of. Because you just can't tell your chief of staff, get me everything on UFOs, because that stuff's buried. It's broken up into pieces and it's all over the place. It's decentralized completely. There's no one big box with UFO material. If Kennedy wanted to know what we knew, by we, I mean the Pentagon, the military industry, what they knew about UFOs, he wouldn't have even known where to begin to know who to ask. But he would have started asking. And once he started asking, the little ripples would have gone out through government. Kennedy's asking about UFOs. This is the last thing we want him to know. He didn't invade the Bay of Pigs like he was supposed to. He kissed up to Khrushchev and got the missiles out of Cuba. We should have bombed the hell out of them. And now he wants the UFO material? No effing way. And that would have been the reaction. No way. He wants to pull out of Vietnam, but you want to give him UFO data? No way. Why would we give this guy the crown jewels, right? We can't trust him. We can't trust him. That would have been their attitude.
For their agenda.
Their agenda, yes.
Because it is their agenda, whoever they are. It's a totally different agenda to what, the government, purports to be standing for. That's the problem. We've got two agendas that are conflicting and, who do you think's going to win? Guys with the big guns.
And the other thing back then is Kennedy was wanting to unite in space exploration and the space race with the Soviet Union.
Can't have that.
And so I think he was even considering that Apollo would be a joint Russian-American venture. And that was a bit of a worry. And I remember, too, there was a moment during the Spotlight trial of E. Howard Hunt, the other only moment in the history like Jim Garrison, where Hunt was a colleague of Hunt's called Doug Caddy turned to him and said, well, why was Kennedy assassinated? And he said, because he was willing to share his information on the alien presence with the USSR.
Right. And to this day, we have not done that. There has been no communication on this because we don't trust them and they don't trust us. And if they knew what we knew, they would have that much more power in the world globally than we would. So no one's talking to everybody and anybody else. There are some governments that are pretty open. Brazil, France, there's countries that, they want to talk about this openly and discuss it. But the United States will not. The Soviet Union did not. Russia today does not. China has a lot of information as well. They're not sharing either.
No.
Then this is something which there's one missing piece to all of this, and that is the others, right? Don't they have a say in this? We're acting as if we control all of this, but if there is an alien presence, whether it's ultra-terrestrial, extraterrestrial, whatever it is, at some point they're going to show up in a way that's unmistakable and undeniable. And now what? Then what happens, right?
We're going to be in big trouble.
Yeah, because we've been lying
they want to
constantly, right?
They have total different capabilities that we're totally unaware of.
We have to assume, right, that eventually they will land on the White House lawn. They will figure out that house is important somehow. Let's go there, not to that house in Ohio or that house in New Hampshire or something. Let's go to that big place, that big decoration. Just show up like day the earth stood still and see what happens. I mean, it's possible. Does the government have a way of making sure that the people in general do not have access to that presence, right? This is the key thing, because we act like we're in charge of the situation. We act like we control the data. But if an alien ship decides to materialize, in front of, it did actually in front of my house. What am I talking about? But I mean, there you go. If they just show up, right, and take me to your leader, there's nothing anybody can do about it. Isn't government thinking about that? Every government thinking about that. We can't control the message if they suddenly show up. So there's all these rumors that there's a contract, there's a deal between governments and the aliens, that somehow they signed something or they agreed on something. They agreed on some approach. but we have a government that changes every 4 years, right?
Yeah.
How does that stay in place since
Yeah, but
1930?
they're not the people that are in charge.
Well, there you go.
They're not the people that are in charge, because this agenda has been going on for a long, long time. And like you said, every 4 years, the government, or every 8 years, just depending, the government changes. But the people that are really running the deep state are they don't get voted in and out. They probably die on the job. They've been in there for a long, long time.
But how much control do they have over the extraterrestrial presence itself is my question.
I don't know.
Well, I don't think they have a lot of great control,
I don't think
because
so.
it's obvious, even with the example of that 1952 flyover, which I find really odd now that you mentioned it, that it was just specializing on the weekends. But we actually spoke to the son of the Secretary of the Secretary of Defense. Years ago.
Yeah.
And he said his mother came home so pale,
freaked out,
going,
totally
we have been invaded from outer space.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you can't get more blatant and obvious than that.
No.
And, I mean, look at how the Australian government's dealing with this. It's total head in the sand. All our politicians, our military are ignoring it and saying it's completely irrelevant. And the amount of profound cases involved with military and civilian aviation in this country, well, it's endless.
Yeah.
And it has been, they might as well have landed on the White House lawn as far as I'm concerned. The trouble is, we have a phenomena here that appears to be extremely complex and contradictory. And our logical reductionistic thinking cannot cope with that. It spirals into a schizophrenic reality.
Yeah.
And, and I think that in many ways, therein lays the heart of the problem.
Mm-hmm.
You have been so generous with your time that I just want to, and I think I mentioned this in our first cast with you, I have not read this book yet, but I'm profoundly affected that a magazine journalist who didn't want to go there all of a sudden has stumbled onto this whole notion that runs through sinister forces. Now, did Tom O'Neill ever get in touch with you? Because I find there's an incredible amount of similarity that sort of drifts across the pages of that book.
Right. No, he didn't. But I've been told about this book so often that I had to go out and read it myself. But yeah, I mean, he does cover some of the same information, some of the same material, and coming to some of the sort of same conclusions, that there's more to it than what we thought, especially the Charles Manson thing, which has always stuck out to me as something very, very bizarre. I mean, again, all the coincidences and the synchronicities. The Bobby Kennedy assassination, right? And there's Sharon Tate and Roman Polanski having dinner with Bobby the night that he's, wins the California primary. And John Frankenheimer drives him to the hotel, right? And Frankenheimer's the guy who wrote the Manchurian Candidate. I mean, you start drawing all these things together and you realize we're living in a David Lynch movie. I mean, that's what we are. That's what this is.
Yeah.
This is this is not, we deal with reality, what we call reality, as far as we can, and it takes us through life from one day to the next and one day to the next, and then every once in a while something comes in from out of left field and it hits us, and then we say okay, and we forget it and we go on. But if we ever made a list of all those events that have happened in our lives that didn't make sense, we would realize we're living somewhere else. This is not is not the reality that they told us about when we were kids. This is something completely different. We're living in a world that's half very naturalistic, very scientific, very mechanistic, very mechanical. We're looking at that, and we have that way of dealing with it. But there's a ghost in the machine, and every once in a while it throws a spanner in the wrench and it does all kinds of crazy stuff. We just go in and fix the machine and we ignore the ghost, and that's what's been going on.
That's the problem, is when you ignore that ghost all the time. But I have a detail for things and I just can't let them go. When something sticks out so far that it doesn't make any sense whatsoever, that I take note of that. And I've been collating those for years and years and years now. And it's like the world you're presenting to me is not the reality. That's just a facade. And that's the facade that most people need to be able to get on and live their day-to-day life, pay their bills, you know, blah, 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 and just go along and not make too many waves. Because if we all really started to go, hey, what is really going on here? We need to know what's going on. Who's really running us? Who's controlling this? Then, you know, there's more of us than them. Right? Here's the thing. There's always been more poor people than rich people, and we could overtake them at any time if we united. The last thing they want us to be is united and cohesive, because then we will overrun them and we will kick them out of power. But if you keep us ignorant and just keep us, you know, feeding us the bullshit because we're in the dark, then we're just going to go along and we're just going to do whatever we need to do to survive and let them get on with whatever agenda they have. And they have an agenda. I don't know what it is, but it's there.
Well, we're the audience, and there's a magician on the stage.
Absolutely.
Right? And as long as we sit in the audience and we're amused by the magic tricks, we're going to go along with it, right? The entertainment, the medium is the message in this case. So we're watching the magic go on, we're watching the magician, and before you know it, our lives, we've lived 70, 80 years watching that magician on the stage.
That's right.
Without realizing that we're just the audience, you know? That we paid our dues.
But, you know, I refuse to believe at this point in time, and my father used to articulate to me, he goes, you Don Quixote, you're tilting at windmills, and your life is just going to disappear in this wishful thinking science fiction vacuum of this material you're drawn to. Until he reached a couple of years before he passed away in his 80s, and he said, we've got friends that live up in Katoomba, and the other day a flying saucer and beings got out on their property, and I trust and appreciate these people. So there might be something more to this reality you're talking about that meets the eye.
Yeah.
He was a victim of medical malpractice
by the Catholic.
In a Catholic hospital. He had a drunk surgeon operate on him on a New Year's Eve and tore all his leg muscle out. He never saw a doctor for another 50 years. But you know, the first book he handed me and said, I want you to desperately read, it was God's Banker by David Yoch. And so there you had this thing in my family. Now, one of the things that we have in common that really excites me is a great love for the peripheral occurrences and sort of random association that occurs in popular culture. And I believe, you know, this notion of like we're searching for governments to disclose. And I think that every eyewitness report that speaks of another is a little piece of disclosure. It's all a little piece of the puzzle. But I'm amazed at how much the intelligence community dallianced in the world of print and media and television. And, you know, one of the researchers I truly admired was Robbie Graham, who passed away recently, which is rather tragic. I think we did the last podcast with him.
We probably tipped him over.
No, don't say that. But his book, Silver Screen Sources, was an incredible academic approach to show us, yes, they are tampering with the way that things in this material is represented on the screen. And I was looking at that incredible podcast you did on the Night Fright show in 2016 with Brent Holland, who's a great JFK researcher.
Yeah.
And I love that. And you spoke about this. I just want to bring this up. You spoke about this Beach Boys and the Manson song, Bluebirds Over the Mountain. Now, did you know, Peter, you might be aware that that song, Bluebirds Over the Mountain, is not written by Manson. The one written by Manson is Never Learned Not to Love.
Which was?
But amazed me that it actually, this one was written by Ursula Hickey, wrote The Bluebirds Over the Mountain. But your train of research led you, because of that word, bluebird, and this is what I think so fascinating, to go into an astounding playwright that in a way had written an obscure play that mirrored the Grassy Knoll and what happened in Dilly Plaza. So do you mind telling us about that? And I think that is just so astounding to me.
The name of the author was Maurice Maeterlinck, and he actually won the Nobel Prize for Literature back around 1900 or so. And he wrote a number of plays. The most famous play was Bluebird. They made a film out of that in Russia, in the Soviet Union, as some sort of a joint operation that they did. So they took Bluebird and they made this film out of it. A lot of very famous movie stars appeared in it. But Bluebird, the story of Bluebird is, we get the word Bluebird. The very first mind control operation of the CIA was Operation Bluebird, named after this particular play. So when I'm researching Bluebird, because I want to know why they would pick Bluebird, what was this play about? And it's rich with symbolism, and it's rich with stuff that could be interpreted from an intelligence perspective, the manipulation of memory being foremost of it. But the same author, bound in the same volume with the Bluebird play, is another play called The Cloud That Lifted. And The Cloud That Lifted is a discussion of it's a play where a king is assassinated by someone who's firing from a grassy knoll. The guy's name is Alec, and they think he's working for Russia. And we don't really know how many shots were fired. Was it 3 or 4? How many bullets were actually fired at this guy?
Mm.
And did he?
When was this written? When was this play written? 1900. Okay.
Yeah, before Kennedy was even born.
Yeah.
Right. Now, this guy wrote a lot about mysticism. Maeterlinck was a major occultist and mystic. He had a castle that he lived in. He rode around on a bicycle. He was a very eccentric guy. But he was very much involved in astrology and mysticism, meditation, and all of this. And he wrote these plays. First one, Bluebird, about the search for the Bluebird of happiness. And a boy and a girl looking forever, trying to find the Bluebird and coming across all sorts of very strange initiatory experiences before finally arriving back home. And then the other play, of course, about an assassination. You have to remember that Lee Harvey Oswald's name in Russia, his nickname was Alec. It was the same name that he ordered the Mannlicher Carcano, Alec Heidel. So Alec in this play is the assassin, but he's shooting from the grassy knoll. He might be working for Russia, and we don't know how many shots were fired.
God.
So it's the whole scenario is there.
Yeah.
And that was the name of the first foray into the search for the control of the human mind by the American intelligence services when it came to us to be known as MK Ultra. Was Bluebird. Yet it features predominantly in The Wizard of Oz.
No, there was a Shirley Temple made.
That's right.
There was a film made. Yeah,
got that wrong.
With Shirley Temple called The Bluebird of Happiness.
And so Manson writes this song, Never Learn Not to Love, on the flip side of Bluebird Over the Mountain.
Yeah.
And now in the book that you just mentioned, Chaos, there's this idea that Charles Manson was a mind control subject, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
So, which would have been Bluebird, et cetera, and going back to that whole, I mean, it gets tighter and tighter.
The links are just.
Yeah, they become congested, really.
And then you see that crossover in popular culture. I mean, E. Howard Hunt even wrote pulp novels on the side, which I think was a bit of pocket money due to the access that the intelligence community had into the publishing arena.
And he wrote 3 occult novels. 3 of those novels were occult novels, one of which was a thinly veiled attack on the Kennedys as being Satanists.
What was the name of those novels and what pseudonym did he use, Peter? Can you remember?
Yeah, I think it was David St. Clair. I think that was his favorite pseudonym. And I believe that particular novel was called The Coven, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, okay.
But I can find that out and let you know. But he wrote 3 novels that were occult based, but that one was really showed his hatred for the Kennedys. Obviously, with the Kennedys he was writing about. So yeah, he lived on Witches Island. That's the place he lived in outside of DC. So
of course.
And then you get moments like Lee Harvey Oswald watching in the late 50s the TV drama I Lived 3 Lives about a triple agent. Is that Herbert Philby?
Philby.
Yeah, Philby.
Herbert Philby. Yeah.
And how odd is that? Philby. Yeah.
Philby. Yeah.
So you would actually get a TV series close to the mark of what was an incredible covert agent whose information I would imagine should never have gotten to the public arena, but then is scripted into a TV series that Lee Harvey Oswald is watching.
Yeah.
And in awe of.
I watched it when I was a kid.
Right. There you go.
Dick Russell, again, to invoke his name, he has this great sentence talking about what we're talking about. And he's talking about de Mohrenschildt. Remember the guy who got Lee Harvey Oswald together with Ruth Paine and the Russians and all this, George de Mohrenschildt.
Yep.
Dick Russell says, in de Mohrenschildt's entire existence, as with so much else surrounding Oswald, we seem to be looking at a kind of voodoo. that's
Wow.
his interpretation. Valet saying these things. Dick Russell, I mean, they write, in Dick Russell's case, very well researched, very deep, heavily interviewed, books on the assassination, but cannot get away from the weirdness of it, the supernatural aspect of it that's just below the surface, that's nagging there. You can't get away with it. Look at Jim Marrs, very famous researcher.
Love Jim Marrs.
Yeah.
Started with the assassination, and slowly from the assassination, like the book that JFK was based on, the film was his book and Jim Garrison's book. Then he starts going into weird areas, right? He starts writing about the moon, and that the moon isn't what we think it is. And then he goes on writing about the Nazis and the Fourth Reich, and on and on. He's starting to get into the mystical side of things. He's writing about, the Illuminati and things like that. He went from being the standard nuts and bolts journalist, into gradually moving into this other direction. A friend of mine, Jim Hogan, a great researcher, a great Watergate researcher. I wanted to be Jim Hogan when I was young. I mean, I had his books and I thought he was great. He was interviewing people, revealing things nobody knew, but then started writing occult novels under another name, right?
Right.
I mean, I call them the Brotherhood Buried Alive. All these guys who started off as journalists, as serious, what we would call serious journalists, print journalists in newspapers, magazines, books, writing about very, specific things, heavily documented, heavily researched. Even then, with all that at their disposal, they knock up against this other world, this other thing, and they can't explain what it is. And they know it's there. They know it's functioning below the scenes. Valet mentioned it, but of course he's involved with UFOs as well. All the people mentioning it, it's all there. This other world is there, and we ignore it at our peril. We're papering it over with all these documents. After a while, we think we're getting somewhere, and we don't.
I think those journalists that actually ended up doing that were actually following the research.
Yeah, we're following the evidence.
They were following the evidence.
Which is being so true to your cause.
Well, that's what you have to do. But once that evidence starts to go down this really bizarre path, this path that is poo-pooed and is discounted in our society, you have to make a decision whether if you follow it, then your credibility is going to be shot to pieces.
Absolutely.
Or you just stick to the hardcore facts, the evidence facts, papers, paper trails and things like that, then you're not getting the whole story.
Right.
So what do? It's a real dilemma, isn't it? Do you follow it all the way through, or do you just stop where the evidence is credible and no more?
Then you're not an investigative
journalist. You're not, but then you are ridiculed by society. So you come up, you're up against a rock and a hard place, and you've got to choose what to do. And either way, you're going to be lacking.
But as a researcher, you have to be honest to the evidence, open-minded, go where that evidence takes you.
I totally understand that, and I will follow somebody who's writing a book. I will follow through with that book, but most people don't. I mean, I hear people that are researching, I won't mention any names, but are researching some area of investigation, and then as soon as they come up anything spooky or UFOs or anything like that, they just shut it down. They go, oh no, I'm not going down there, these people are crazy. You know what I mean? And it's like, well, you actually not finding out the whole picture. You're not finding out the whole story, and then you're going to be
Then you have the reverse side. You have people who believe 10 impossible things before breakfast, and you can't listen to them either because they're insane, right? They're not making any sense at all. So you have to find a middle ground between both of them, because there's two worlds we're talking about. And if you're only talking about one at the expense of the other, you're not going to get the whole picture. And there's a lot of people who go down the rabbit hole right away, and they come up with these outlandish conspiracy theories.
Sure.
it's okay because, it will lead you eventually to the truth if you pursue it, if you have critical thinking skills and you really look at it that way. But quite often they don't. They stop right there and they think they've solved the riddle of the universe, right? So those are the people I have the hardest time with. I mean, those who are very, very literal and journalistic, I can take them so far, or they'll take me so far, leave me alone. But the people who start from the other side, I have to talk to them, nicely and say, wait, this is not how that worked. That's not what happened. Here's the documents. What you are thinking, you're on the right track, but it happened a different way. And it's you find yourself in the middle of trying to make sense of both sides. And I think that's been my position for years, trying to make each side understand the other. It's very hard to do. It's very tricky.
It's a very sensitive juggling job.
Absolutely. Well, we came to it from, reading, like about real life conspiracies years ago. Do you know what I mean? 30, 40 years ago. And then it eventually, slowly, incrementally, but by understanding, by seeing patterns emerge, the same people, in the JFK assassination, UFO investigations, and all kinds of, Jim Jones, thing, and you start to go, okay, there's something really going on here. There's something really hard, concrete that is stepping over into these really weird, things that we've been told don't exist or are spooky or crazy or whatever, but you just got to keep following it slowly and really taking in the information. And we've come to it now after nearly, 30 some odd years of reading, but that's not where we started. Do you know what I mean? And so if I try to explain to someone something, I just can't do it because you need all that background information. You need to be led down very slowly down that rabbit warren. Otherwise, you just, you're Alice in Wonderland and you're gone.
You need a context. You need context for this
Absolutely.
material. And without the context, you don't know what you're talking about. That's true. 100%.
No. Yeah.
And we need to respect good researchers. I mean, our background's in mental health as well. And, I had a band of mentally ill musicians there who were completely disempowered for years. And the only thing I thought I could do for them was get them out of the nursing home and give them amplification. And a couple of those people that we took in and lived with us, well, one of them ended up in a hostel with about 100 paintings on Dealey Plaza. And they said, what have you done to this person? I said, well, just affected by the zeitgeist.
What was going on?
I'm well aware that, when it came to actually looking at abduction scenarios, that we would check that person's mental health out first and foremost. But I'm also aware that this is so complex. I mean, there's a great line Terence McKenna uses, where they were saying, were you on any substances? And he goes, the only time I've ever experienced walking with the aliens is when I was on psilocybin. So yes, I was on every substance known to man. So I think that there are moments where you have to show incredible discernment. So just step back from the information, realize that there's 95% noise attached to this signal. A lot of it can be just pure exploitation in this culture. I think there's a lot of people out there that are aware that they have glimpsed a separate aspect to this reality that's all encompassing, yet they've got no power in their own lives. So they're going to want to find the sacred jewels to enlightenment, to their religiosity. And I can't hold them against them, but they become a product of like carrying so much disinformation into other areas of research. It becomes clouded and very clouded. But look, let me just round this up at the end.
Okay, let's wrap it up because
there was a great piece of research I was coming to from someone that I have to use a lot of discernment with. And then that is Richard Hoagland from the Mars missions, who has moments where I think he sort of fulfills his criteria without really getting behind the material. But he did alert me to a 3 real Viewmaster set that was allegedly written by someone of the paperclip scientists for sale. And this was a live television program in the 50s, but on the 3 real Viewmaster set, it actually becomes a diorama with puppets. And I don't know if you know this, called It's Space Patrol.
Yeah, Space Patrol.
And the three-reel set is the only set pertaining to that TV series, even though it's these puppets. And they are made aware of an edifice on the moon, very similar to 2001.
Yeah, an obelisk.
An obelisk. They go there. That makes them aware of a face on Mars, which they fly to Mars. And in the what looks like a sphinx on Mars, they actually find evidence that there is an asteroid in the asteroid belt that they need to take a look at, which happens to be hollow and holds the secrets to anti-gravity. And they bring back to a secret base in the Mojave Desert.
This is 1956, right?
55, 56.
55, 56, yeah.
And they test fly this thing with three like men in black puppets looking into a secluded area in this facility. Now, that's just a very short summation of that.
Yeah.
I had to find those original Viewmasters and look at them, and I think it's an astounding thing. And some people have said it was written by Von Braun. We know that Von Braun was writing a lot of material for Disney at that stage. And it's very odd sometimes to look at, you know, the wonderful world of Walt Disney and see Von Braun
Nazis
stepping out
all over the place.
Language.
Oh my God! If that came on television on a Sunday, because they used to watch it on Sunday night at 6 o'clock here in the 70s, late 60s, early 70s, and my mom would just be rabidly going off about the Nazis and the Americans, how they were in cahoots with them. And that's all I ever heard in the house when I was young. So I had a totally kind of different view of America. I knew that America had sort of like these sort of, questionable links to the Nazis. And I couldn't understand it for the life of me, how that even would happen. But, you know, you get older, you read some books and you find out.
Anyway, look, Peter's going to eat some dinner tonight, and he's been so generous with his time. But, you know, just to round that up, George Norrie was handed some photos that have been found of Dilley Plaza by Richard Hoagland. Now, I can't find really prying back to the source, but I don't know if you're aware of these pictures. It was around 2009, Peter, that they appeared. But they show...
So this is supposed to be on the day?
Yes, very close to the assassination. If you look up there on the records building, on the right-hand side, there is an anomalous object flying over the top of that building.
And then
Here's
this is a
close
close-up
shot of it.
Ooh.
Out of that still. Now, have you been aware of these photos? Do you know anything about them at all?
And that's a helicopter.
No.
Wow. Okay, there you go.
I'm very happy to be able to do that for you. I don't know if they're real or not, but I'm glad to have that little moment. But you know what? In the scheme of things, as an open-minded researcher, I wouldn't put it past that anomalous world out there that was occurring on that day.
Right.
It's like, you mean there weren't any flying saucers there on that day? There had to be. Everything else was there.
Now, two things I'm going to say to you. We are never going to give up, even if it turns out to be incredibly impossible, searching for that footage of what might likely be you leaving that funeral procession on that day. And the other thing we're going to do is we've got a few people that have links through to David Lynch. So we're going to push to make sure that Lynch is at least aware of those three books, but becomes more aware of you. And hopefully one day, if we keep our fingers crossed, positively affirmate with pure intention in our heart, we will get you two to meet.
Okay, so I was just quickly going to say to Peter too, if he's aware of our last week's podcast we did with David Thrussell, which was the album that he pulled out, he put together called The Ballad of JFK, and it's all songs pertaining to JFK around the time that he was murdered, that he was assassinated.
Oh,
and he's collated.
I will look for that for sure.
So if you look on our last week's podcast, that's David talking about his whole story about putting that album together. And fascinating.
We so appreciate your comments on our podcast about Puharich, and I'm fascinated at one stage to spend more time talking about that crossover into television and film with those people.
Yeah.
It always astounded me.
They were friends. So
Don't go out and buy that record. We will get you a signed copy from David Thrust. We'll get you a CD copy and send it to you. I'll sort that out for the future. What is on the cards for you in the future? Where are you leading to now in your research and what you're doing?
Wow. I've always have 2 or 3 projects going on simultaneously, which is really not a good idea because they don't get done. But I've got one which is strictly sort of Kabbalistic, right? So it's a book about one specific aspect of Kabbalah, which has fascinated me for a while. So it should not be a long book. It should be rather short. I should get that done probably the next couple of months. And then I have another much longer book on, I don't know how to explain it. That's part of the problem. It's about the relationship of the body, the human body, with spiritual reality, spiritual experiences. So how does the anatomy and physiology of the human body, how does it relate to something less tangible? So consciousness, that kind of thing. So I've been working on that book for a while. And I have a few other things like that similar things that I'm working on. So nothing too much on the political front at the moment, but I have been writing a Substack. And I've been talking about my history with various individuals and various things, historically and politically. So that's up as well. It's Substack. I think it's called Sinister Forces, or it's my name, peterlevenda.substack. So you can find that as well. And that's free. That's just something that I do. Every couple of weeks, I put another one up there, trying to write basically about politics, but from my perspective, and also talking about things that people may not realize, may not know. Brooke Shields' very first film, was a film that was done in Paterson, New Jersey, with a guy that I knew was an agent for CIA in the Middle East and all kinds of other stuff. And
was that Pretty Baby?
No. Prior to Pretty Baby was the Murderers film, wasn't it? It was similar to Don't Look Now. It had a sort of feel
Communion?
like...
Was it Communion?
No.
Communion. That was
Communion.
One of the titles. Communion was one of the
Yes, it was. It
Communion.
was. And it had a sort of motif like Don't Look Now with Donald Pleasance, didn't it?
Yeah.
It's an amazingly weird film.
Yeah, it is. It is.
It absolutely is. But there's details about it people are not aware of. And I that's in one of my first Substacks. I talk about that film. And my relation to that guy who played the Undertaker or the coroner in that film was a wrestler, a very famous wrestler called Antonino Rocca. And I met him when I was about 18, 19 years old at a synagogue in New York at a meeting with a rabbi and 2 clerics and myself and Rocca, who's bragging about how he was smuggling phantom jets into Israel, and he was working for CIA and getting agents killed out from under him and all the rest of it. Wild story. When I put that Substack up a couple of months ago, it caused a stir among the wrestling community.
All right. Okay.
Wow.
The wrestlers didn't realize that Rocca had this other side to him. And so there was this huge podcast thing that went on for a while. Who's Levenda and how does he know about this stuff? He's a nobody. He doesn't know anything about wrestling. How could he know Antonino Rocca? I thought it was hysterical. So they were just like bouncing off of walls. Now we know where he was all those years when we didn't know where he was, and he stopped wrestling. Right. So anyway.
Isn't that ironic? I mean, we've got a bit of a heartline into the world of wrestling here in Australia. And, I mean, Andre the Giant ended up on the $6 million man as Bigfoot.
Yeah, right.
So isn't that astounding? Can you please excuse my absolutely painful naivety, Substack, or explain that to me, and how do people find this? It's like a blog.
Sorry. Yeah, it's like a site for bloggers, basically.
Right.
And there are famous people on Substack and there are totally unknown people on Substack, everything in between. You write what you want, you post it up there, and that's it, right? People can read it or not as they like. You can create a paid tier system where people have to pay to read it. But I don't find that very useful for me right now. So I'm just doing, as I care to. I put in an article and people read it. And then you get, people say they like it, they don't like it, or they whatever. It's you just look at it. I think if you were to type in peterlevenda.substack.com, you would probably find mine.
Substack.
It's one word, sub as in submarine, Substack.
Right. Okay.
Right.
All right.
Yeah.
We'll check it out.
And again, is it Amazon the best place for people to purchase your books?
Yes, it is the best place. There are some independent publishers who carry them as well, if you have a mind to. But for the most part, it's going to be Amazon.
Okay.
For my sins. Yeah.
And is that about 26, 27 books you've published already?
You know, I've lost count, but it's about, I would say 22, 23 at least. Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
All right.
See, I'm just projecting into the future there. It's just slipped. I can see that occurring. The other thing I wanted to say to you and remind you, Peter, and, you know, my heart just breaks with how generous and brilliant and beautiful you've been with us. But we have inherited this huge metaphysical collection. So if you're searching for some odd book, please run a title past us on Messenger and we can talk to you about that. Now, if people want to personally get in touch with you, is that something you're up for or not? And how would they do it?
Well, I'm on Facebook. I'm on Instagram. I'm on X and on Threads. I was put on all these things when I got involved with Tom DeLonge. Otherwise, until 2015, I had been on nothing. Nothing. And they said to me,
that way.
You know, so they forced me. They actually set up the accounts and said, "Here's your accounts. Here's your passwords. You know, do things."
Yeah, right.
So I've not been very good at any of that. But anyway, you can reach me there for sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you can send messages to me on Substack as well. You can use that as an email drop also.
Yeah, and make sure you don't overcrowd this man with a lot of noise that's out there in the zeitgeist. One of the things that really excited both my wife and I about Sinister Forces is the forwards. And the third forward was written by a hero of ours that's no longer with us, Paul Krasner, the man behind The Realist. I just want to show you here from the book One Hand Jerking, which I think is an incredible title. His acknowledgement of Aspirin, he's written to fellow Martians.
Yes. Yeah.
By Paul Krasner.
Where is it? It's gone. It's disappeared. Well, he's just written, to Jamie Nasper, fellow Martians, enjoy what?
Enjoy or else.
Oh, enjoy or else. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. He came out for the Writers' Festival out here and he was just a joy. Yeah.
And I can remember at that stage I was doing the movie show and I had a bit of a profile that's disappeared completely now. But so I was a film critic on television. A group of elderly ladies said, "Which writer would you recommend?" And I said, "Look, come with me to Paul Krasner." So I sat down this table and about 6 elderly ladies. Paul stood up and went into the terrible diabolical sexual history of Danny Thomas. And these women really collapsed.
It was fascinating. We loved it. But, those ladies, they just...
Yeah, I guess not, huh? That's too bad.
No. Anyway.
I hope you have a great evening. I want to wish you and everyone in that continent a very happy and peaceful and safe Thanksgiving. It's been an absolute honor and a privilege to spend time with you. And I thank you for the generosity of your soul deeply, Peter. We're incredibly moved by who you are and your creativity. And thank you for being an inspiration to all of us.
Not at all. My pleasure is mine and the privilege is mine. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And this podcast will go up on Friday evening at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, I think it is. In the US.
Eastern It'll be Saturday for us here in Australia.
Anyway, so if you want to tune in or not.
And I tell you what, you know, how we say we've always got an interesting show coming up in the future. I am really moved by who Peter is.
Absolutely.
And I'm so grateful for him giving us that time. And certainly when I doubt we're going to be able to do him any privileges through being on that cast, but he's certainly assisting us. So thank you so much. Bless you and your family, Peter, and thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
All right. We'll be back next week with another show, and who knows where we're going next week, but we'll be going somewhere. So thank you, and see you then.
All right. Take good care. Good night, Peter.
Good night.
Bye.